the first thing every civilization gets wrong about humanity is believing they already understand it. Alara Vale had repeated those words with quiet certainty during the final briefing before leaving home, though she had spoken them with irony rather than respect. Humans, according to every archive in the Stellar Concordium, were an emerging species with unreliable emotional judgment, primitive engineering methods, and an unhealthy tendency to solve impossible problems through improvisation instead of logic. They were fascinating to observe, perhaps, but hardly worthy of admiration. Her mission had never been diplomacy. It was simple. Repair her damaged exploration vessel after an unexpected gravitational disturbance forced an emergency descent, erase all traces of advanced technology, and depart before the native population discovered anything unusual. Failure was statistically insignificant. At least, that was what every calculation predicted. The warning alarms echoed through the narrow cockpit as brilliant white light poured across the fractured canopy. Every control panel shimmered with cascading symbols while the ship shuddered beneath her hands. Outside, Earth's atmosphere wrapped around the silver hull like liquid fire, turning the night into a river of gold and crimson. Alara's breathing remained calm despite the violent descent. Fear served no useful engineering function. Her fingers moved across holographic controls with practiced precision, redirecting reserve power from non-essential systems into structural stabilization. 8%, then 6, then 4. Numbers she did not enjoy watching. A sharp vibration rolled through the frame as another external plate detached and disappeared into the burning sky. She closed one luminous amber eye for the briefest moment before opening it again. "Compensate," she whispered. The ship answered with silence. Primary guidance had already failed. Artificial intelligence support had shut itself down to preserve the core memory vault. Every remaining decision belonged to her alone. Below, endless desert stretched beneath scattered mountains bathed in pale moonlight. Dry lakebeds reflected silver against the darkness while long highways cut lonely lines through the Nevada wilderness. The location was unexpectedly favorable. Sparse population. Low probability of immediate detection. She adjusted the remaining thrusters manually, sacrificing the last auxiliary stabilizer to reduce impact velocity. The landing would not be elegant. It only needed to be survivable. The vessel struck the desert floor with a grinding howl of metal against stone before sliding across loose sand for hundreds of feet. Dust climbed into the air like a rising curtain, swallowing everything beyond the cracked cockpit. When the movement finally stopped, an unfamiliar stillness settled over the world. No warning sirens. No mechanical voices. Only the distant whisper of desert wind brushing against cooling alloy. Alara remained perfectly motionless for several seconds, allowing her heartbeat to return to its measured rhythm. She studied the diagnostics projected above her wrist. Propulsion offline. Long-range communications destroyed. Quantum relay fractured beyond immediate repair. Energy reserves critically low. Estimated repair time using standard Concordium equipment, 36 hours. Estimated repair time using local resources, impossible. She released the restraint harness and stepped carefully from the fractured hatch. Cool desert air greeted her with unexpected softness. The stars above Earth looked strangely familiar despite belonging to a younger civilization. In the distance, coyotes called across the empty landscape, their voices carrying through the night with haunting clarity. Alara slowly turned in a full circle, scanning the horizon. Primitive world, she thought. Primitive people. She only needed enough time to restore her ship before any human wandered close enough to complicate the mission. What she could not know was that less than 3 miles away, a white human engineer named Lucas Bennett had already seen a streak of impossible light crossing the sky, and instead of calling anyone else, he quietly reached for his truck keys. Lucas Bennett had spent enough years repairing machines to know that the sky was not supposed to leave scars across the desert. The streak of light he had watched from the roof of his workshop had moved too steadily to be a meteor and far too quietly to be military aircraft. He finished tightening the final bolt on an old aircraft engine, wiped the grease from his hands with a faded blue shop towel, and looked toward the distant mountains again. The glow had disappeared, but a faint column of dust still hovered against the moonlit horizon. His old pickup started on the second attempt, its familiar rumble echoing across the empty Nevada road as he drove toward the impact site. The farther he traveled, the stranger the silence became. Even the usual chorus of insects seemed absent. 20 minutes later, the headlights swept across scattered rocks before revealing a long trail carved into the sand, as though something impossibly heavy had slid across the desert without leaving ordinary tire marks. Lucas slowed the truck and climbed out, carrying only a powerful flashlight, a toolbox, and a gallon of drinking water that rarely left the passenger seat. He followed the trail on foot until a metallic silhouette gradually emerged through the settling dust. It was unlike any aircraft he had ever restored. Every curve looked intentional. Every surface reflected moonlight with a softness that reminded him of polished ceramic instead of metal. There were no visible rivets, no weld seams, no recognizable engine housing. He stood perfectly still, resisting every instinct to touch it. Then the damaged hatch opened with a whisper. A young woman stepped into the cool night, as if she had rehearsed the movement 1,000 times. She was tall, graceful, dressed in a fitted silver travel suit marked with elegant geometric patterns that caught the starlight. Her pale luminous skin seemed almost carved from pearl, while long platinum hair rested neatly across one shoulder despite the crash. Her amber eyes fixed on Lucas immediately, calm rather than frightened, analytical rather than emotional. A thin band of translucent light briefly circled her wrist before fading. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The desert wind carried the scent of dry sage between them. Lucas slowly raised one open hand to show he meant no harm. "Looks like you had a rough landing," he said with an easy smile. The woman studied his face without returning the expression. Tiny movements flickered across her wrist display, measuring everything from his height to his breathing pattern. "Maintain your distance," she replied in clear English with only the slightest unfamiliar rhythm. "Your assistance is unnecessary." Lucas blinked once, surprised less by her appearance than by the fact that she spoke his language so naturally. "All right," he answered. "But your ship looks like it could use another opinion." She glanced toward the damaged hull before looking back at him. "Your technological capability is insufficient for meaningful contribution." The words were not cruel. They were simply delivered as though they were mathematical truth. Lucas chuckled quietly. "I have heard that before." Alara frowned almost imperceptibly. The response did not fit any behavioral model she had studied. Most intelligent species reacted to dismissal with offense or pride. This human answered with patience. He gently placed the unopened water container on a nearby rock and stepped backward several feet. "You do not have to trust me," he said. "But desert nights get colder than people expect, and you look like you have enough problems already." Without waiting for permission or gratitude, Lucas turned toward his truck. Alara watched him leave in complete silence, her logical predictions struggling against an observation that no database had prepared her for. The first human she had ever met had offered help, accepted rejection without resentment, and walked away leaving something valuable behind while asking absolutely nothing in return. The pickup truck disappeared beyond the ridge, leaving only the fading sound of its engine to dissolve into the vast silence of the desert. Alara remained exactly where she stood, her amber eyes fixed on the clear plastic container resting on the weathered rock. According to every protocol she had memorized since childhood, accepting unknown objects from an undeveloped civilization carried measurable biological and technological risks. She activated a narrow beam from the translucent band around her wrist. Soft blue light swept across the bottle, examining its molecular structure one layer at a time. The report appeared instantly across her retinal display. Purified water. No detectable toxins. No engineered microorganisms. No tracking devices. No chemical agents capable of compromising her physiology. The probability of harmful intent measured less than 0.0004%. She looked toward the empty road where the human had disappeared. The statistics made even less sense than his behavior. Her attention returned to the damaged vessel. The outer hull had survived better than expected, but the primary gravimetric stabilizer remained fractured beyond self-repair. The internal fabrication unit flashed an unchanging message. Specialized crystalline conductor required. Component unavailable. She opened a maintenance compartment beneath the port engine and carefully removed the damaged assembly. The crystal lattice inside had shattered into dozens of microscopic fractures that scattered the incoming energy instead of guiding it. No amount of recalibration would restore it. She quietly exhaled through her nose. For the first time since reaching Earth, she acknowledged a possibility she had refused to calculate. She might not leave this planet on schedule. As dawn slowly painted the eastern horizon with soft shades of gold and pale orange, the desert revealed details hidden by darkness. Weathered stone formations stretched across the valley, while scattered Joshua trees stood like silent guardians beneath the growing light. Warm air carried the faint scent of dry earth mixed with distant sagebrush. Alara had studied thousands of planetary environments, yet Earth possessed an unexpected gentleness that no scientific report had fully described. A familiar engine echoed across the open landscape. She immediately turned. The same aging pickup approached slowly through the sand before stopping several yards from the vessel. Lucas Bennett stepped out carrying a large red toolbox in one hand and a small insulated cooler in the other. He paused at a respectful distance instead of walking directly toward her. "Good morning," he said with the same relaxed smile. "I figured you might still be busy." Alara watched him carefully. "You have returned. I said your ship looked like it needed another opinion." He gently placed the toolbox on the ground. "I also brought breakfast. I was not sure what you could eat, so I kept it simple." He opened the cooler just enough for her to see fresh fruit, bottled water, and several plain rolls sealed inside paper wrapping. There was no expectation in his face. No attempt to persuade her. Only quiet patience. "Your nutritional assumptions are unsupported by available biological data," Alara replied. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Probably true." He closed the cooler again without the slightest sign of embarrassment. "Then at least the water should still be useful." Alara hesitated for nearly 3 full seconds before speaking again. "Why are you assisting me?" Lucas looked toward the damaged spacecraft instead of answering immediately. Sunlight reflected across its fractured silver surface, while tiny grains of sand sparkled around the landing scar. Finally, he shrugged with disarming simplicity. "Because if I ever landed somewhere I did not belong, I would hope the first person I met would bring a wrench instead of a reason to leave." Alara said nothing. Her translator confirmed every word. Yet it was not the language that challenged her understanding. It was the idea itself. Among her people, assistance was earned through rank, duty, or formal obligation. Here, on a world she had dismissed as primitive only hours earlier, a stranger had arrived twice carrying supplies, expecting nothing except the chance to make another stranger's burden a little lighter. For the first time since her mission began, one conclusion quietly appeared inside her perfectly ordered mind, and no algorithm could explain it. The morning sun climbed steadily above the Nevada mountains, washing the desert in warm shades of amber that reflected across the damaged hull like ripples on still water. Lucas knelt beside the fractured gravimetric stabilizer without reaching for it, waiting until Alara gave the smallest nod of permission. Only then did he lean closer, studying the intricate lattice. Hidden beneath layers of smooth alloy, his experienced eyes moved slowly across every crack and every burn mark. He could not identify the technology, but he recognized something universal. Machines always left clues for those patient enough to look. Alara watched him from a short distance, her arms folded behind her back. Every movement he made contradicted the assumptions stored inside her education. Primitive engineers, according to Concordium doctrine, relied heavily on trial and error. Lucas did neither. He observed first. He measured with his eyes before touching anything. He tilted his head slightly whenever sunlight reflected across the fractured crystal, almost as though he were listening instead of looking. After several quiet minutes, he stepped back. "I do not know what this thing does," he admitted honestly, "but whatever carries energy through it stopped flowing right here." He pointed toward the center of the damaged crystal where dozens of microscopic fractures spread outward like frozen lightning. Alara activated her wrist display and compared his observation with the internal diagnostics. The highlighted section matched perfectly. She looked at him with genuine surprise. "Your conclusion is correct." Lucas smiled. "Years of rebuilding old airplane engines. Different machine. Same habit. Broken parts usually tell you where the story began." The sentence lingered in her thoughts longer than expected. Machines tell stories. Her people described engineering as mathematics made visible. Humans apparently described it as something almost alive. Neither explanation violated physics, yet they felt profoundly different. Lucas opened the large red toolbox and removed several precision calipers, a magnifying visor, and a thick notebook filled with sketches of engines, gears, bearings, and handwritten measurements collected over decades. Alara's eyes settled on the notebook. "You preserve engineering data on processed cellulose." Lucas laughed softly. "Paper never crashes, never runs out of batteries, and coffee stains make good reminders. She did not understand the final remark, but she quietly recorded it anyway. He flipped through several pages before, stopping at a rough drawing of a cracked turbine shaft. "See this?" he asked. "Everybody wanted to replace it. I rebuilt it instead because the replacement would have taken 6 months to arrive." Sometimes the answer is not finding the perfect part. Sometimes it is understanding what the part is trying to accomplish. Alara slowly looked back toward her damaged stabilizer. That single sentence reached deeper than he realized. Throughout her entire education, every damaged Concordium component had one accepted solution: replace it. Improvisation represented unnecessary risk. Lucas was suggesting something completely different. Build around the problem instead of waiting for perfection. She carefully removed the shattered crystal from its housing and placed it beside his notebook. "The original material cannot be replicated using Earth technology," she explained. "Its molecular arrangement requires fabrication inside a zero-gravity quantum furnace." Lucas rested one hand on the toolbox and studied the empty housing instead of the broken crystal. "Then maybe we are asking the wrong question." Alara tilted her head slightly. "Explain." He looked across the endless desert where morning light shimmered above the sand. "Instead of asking how to rebuild the exact part, maybe we should ask what job it needs to do. Once we know that, we can figure out another way." Silence settled between them again, broken only by a gentle breeze carrying the scent of warm sagebrush. Alara's wrist display continued calculating thousands of repair possibilities, yet none of its advanced algorithms had suggested the simple question spoken by a mechanic standing beside an old pickup truck. For the second time in less than a day, a human with technology centuries behind her own had introduced an idea her civilization had never thought to consider. By late afternoon, the desert had transformed beneath the relentless Nevada sun. Heat shimmered above the sand, bending the horizon into gentle waves while the damaged Starship reflected ribbons of silver light across the valley. Lucas sat on the lowered tailgate of his truck with a yellow legal pad balanced across one knee, filling page after page. With sketches that blended ordinary mechanical principles with ideas inspired by technology he barely understood. Alara watched from the open maintenance bay, silently comparing his hand-drawn diagrams with the sophisticated three-dimensional simulations projected across her wrist display. To her surprise, the overall concepts followed remarkably similar paths despite beginning from entirely different scientific foundations. One relied on equations developed across thousands of years of interstellar research. The other relied on experience gathered from repairing machines that had never left Earth's atmosphere. Yet somehow they kept arriving at neighboring conclusions. Lucas eventually looked up from the notebook and smiled. "I think we need materials I cannot find out here." Alara closed the maintenance panel. "The conductor housing requires an alloy with exceptional thermal stability." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "There is a salvage yard about 40 miles from here. Old aerospace parts, experimental metals, plenty of pieces people forgot had value." She considered the suggestion for several seconds. "Your probability of locating a compatible material remains extremely low." "Probably," he admitted without hesitation. "But zero and unlikely are not the same thing." That sentence quietly settled beside every other impossible lesson he had offered since they met. Logic told her the journey would almost certainly fail. Curiosity suggested otherwise. They covered the damaged vessel beneath a lightweight camouflage fabric Lucas normally used for restoring vintage aircraft outdoors. From a distance, the silver craft became little more than another weathered shape among scattered rocks. Alara observed the simple solution with genuine appreciation. Her civilization often relied upon active optical concealment requiring constant energy. Lucas solved the same problem with fabric, color, and careful placement beneath natural shadows. Elegant simplicity required no power at all. The old pickup rolled steadily along a narrow desert highway, its engine humming with familiar determination while warm wind drifted through the open windows carrying the scent of dry sage and sun-baked stone. Alara occupied the passenger seat in complete silence, studying everything beyond the glass. Telephone poles stretched toward distant mountains in perfect rhythm. Rusted fences divided empty land that seemed almost endless. A hawk circled high overhead, gliding without visible effort. Every few miles they passed faded mailboxes standing alone beside the road, silent evidence that people had chosen to build lives in places where the desert appeared to offer almost nothing. None of these ordinary details existed in the cultural reports she had studied. Eventually, Lucas slowed beside a small roadside diner with a weathered wooden sign and several pickup trucks parked outside. "Best pie within 50 miles, he said casually. "Also the friendliest coffee in Nevada." Alara glanced toward the modest building where families, construction workers, and elderly couples moved through the windows with easy familiarity. "This location serves no strategic purpose," she observed. Lucas laughed quietly. "Not everything people build has to." Before she could ask another question, an elderly woman stepped onto the front porch carrying a tray of fresh flowers. She smiled warmly at Lucas before noticing Alara. There was curiosity in her expression, but no fear. She simply lifted one hand in greeting. Lucas returned the wave as naturally as breathing. Alara watched the brief exchange in thoughtful silence. No identification had been requested. No transaction had taken place. Nothing had been gained. Yet kindness had been exchanged as effortlessly as sunlight across the open desert. As the truck continued down the highway a few moments later, she found herself looking into the side mirror, watching the small diner disappear behind them. For reasons she could not quantify, the simple wave from a stranger lingered in her thoughts longer than any engineering equation she had solved that day. The salvage yard stretched across nearly 20 acres beneath the fading afternoon sun, its endless rows of retired aircraft, weathered machinery, and forgotten industrial equipment glowing softly beneath layers of desert dust. Lucas parked beside a faded warehouse whose metal roof sang quietly whenever the warm wind swept across it. The moment he stepped out of the truck, an older man wearing a sun-bleached baseball cap waved from behind a stack of aluminum panels. "Lucas," he called with an easy grin. "I was wondering when another impossible project would bring you back." Lucas laughed as they shook hands. "Good to see you too, Frank. I need to look through your aerospace scrap. The strange pile, not the ordinary pile." Frank raised an eyebrow before noticing Alara standing quietly beside the truck. She observed everything without speaking, her amber eyes moving from shelves of mechanical parts to handwritten inventory tags hanging from dusty shelves. "Friend of yours?" Frank asked. "She is working on a transportation problem," Lucas replied with complete honesty, although not the complete truth. Frank nodded as though that explained everything. "Then she came to the right place. Around here, every broken machine is just waiting for somebody stubborn enough to believe it can work again." Alara followed them into the largest storage building where sunlight filtered through narrow gaps in the roof, filling the air with glowing beams that illuminated floating dust like tiny stars. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, carrying titanium brackets, experimental composites, turbine blades, heat shields, wiring harnesses, and components salvaged from decades of aerospace research. None of them matched the advanced materials used by her civilization, yet she found herself fascinated by the extraordinary variety. Humans rarely discarded knowledge completely. They preserved fragments, believing one forgotten part might someday solve another problem. Lucas carefully examined each shelf with practiced patience. He never rushed. Occasionally he picked up an oddly shaped component, turned it beneath the light, smiled faintly, then returned it to its place. Alara finally asked, "How do you know where to search without complete inventory indexing?" Lucas looked back over his shoulder. "Experience helps. Curiosity helps more." The answer seemed almost too simple, yet it explained his actions perfectly. Several minutes later, he stopped beside an old experimental thermal control assembly removed years earlier from a canceled spacecraft prototype. Most of the surrounding metal had corroded beyond usefulness, but one internal ceramic alloy ring remained untouched by time. Lucas carefully removed it and handed it to Alara. She activated her wrist scanner. Soft blue light circled the weathered component while detailed molecular readings scrolled across her display. Thermal resistance exceeded expectations. Structural stability remained exceptionally high. Electrical behavior differed from Concordium standards, but not enough to dismiss entirely. For several long seconds, she simply stared at the results. "This should not function," she whispered almost to herself. Lucas smiled gently. "Does it?" She looked up, genuine surprise replacing her usual calm confidence. "It might." Frank watched the exchange with quiet amusement, completely unaware that a discarded piece of forgotten human engineering had just challenged centuries of accepted scientific certainty. As evening settled outside, Lucas carried the ceramic ring toward the truck while Alara followed more slowly. Before climbing inside, she paused beside the weathered building and looked back across the countless rows of salvaged machines resting peacefully beneath the golden light. Her people celebrated flawless innovation. Humans seemed equally willing to celebrate second chances. Standing there among broken things that refused to become worthless, she quietly wondered if that philosophy extended beyond machines, and whether it might explain the people who built them. The drive back across the desert unfolded beneath a sky slowly surrendering its blue to deep shades of orange and violet. Long shadows stretched across the empty highway while the ceramic alloy ring rested carefully inside a padded case between Lucas and Alara. Neither of them spoke for several miles. The steady rhythm of the aging truck and the soft hum of its tires against the pavement seemed to leave enough room for thoughts that neither of them had expected to carry. Alara continued reviewing the molecular scans projected discreetly across her wrist display. Every calculation reached the same conclusion. The salvaged human component should not have been compatible with Concordium propulsion architecture, yet by introducing several adaptive field corrections, the material could perform the essential function of stabilizing the damaged energy channel. It would not be elegant. It would not satisfy any engineering academy in her civilization, but it could work. That realization unsettled her far more than another impossible failure would have. Lucas eventually glanced toward her. "You have been quiet for almost 20 minutes. She lowered the display. "I am reconsidering several conclusions." He smiled without taking his eyes off the road. "Those are usually the important ones." As the last sunlight slipped below the mountains, the camouflage-covered Starship came back into view exactly where they had left it. The surrounding desert remained peaceful. Warm evening air carried the distant calls of birds settling into the rocky cliffs while the first stars gradually appeared overhead. Together they uncovered the vessel and returned to the open maintenance bay. Lucas placed the ceramic ring beside the fractured stabilizer while Alara carefully aligned several precision instruments around the exposed housing. Their movements had already become strangely synchronized. He handed her tools before she requested them. She adjusted diagnostic settings moments before he needed fresh readings. Neither of them noticed when cooperation quietly replaced caution. Nearly an hour passed before an unfamiliar tone echoed softly through the ship. Alara froze. Every display inside the maintenance compartment shifted from blue to pale silver. A narrow holographic map expanded above the damaged console, revealing dozens of tiny stars surrounding Earth's system. One distant point pulsed steadily. Then another. Her expression changed for the first time since arriving on the planet. Lucas immediately noticed it. What happened? She studied the expanding data in complete silence before answering. "A long-range Concordium search vessel has entered this sector." Lucas looked toward the night sky where countless stars shimmered peacefully above the desert. "They found you." She nodded slowly. "My emergency beacon partially survived atmospheric entry. I believed it had failed completely. Apparently, it continued transmitting at extremely low power." The map updated again. "Estimated arrival, 20 hours. Lucas rested one hand against the side of the ship. "That sounds like good news." Alara did not answer immediately. Instead, she deactivated the projection and looked directly at him. "Not necessarily." Her voice remained calm, but something quieter hid beneath its usual confidence. "My superiors expected a routine recovery operation. They did not expect unauthorized contact with an undeveloped civilization." Lucas frowned slightly. "You mean me?" She inclined her head once. "Protocol requires absolute secrecy regarding advanced Concordium technology." Silence settled between them as cool evening air drifted through the damaged hull. Lucas looked around the maintenance bay, then back toward the truck parked a short distance away. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Then we have less time than we thought." There was no frustration in his voice. No complaint. Only practical acceptance. Alara searched his face, almost expecting disappointment or fear. Instead, she found the same quiet determination she had seen from the beginning. At that moment, another realization settled gently into her thoughts. Lucas Bennett had never helped her because he expected the story to become easier. He had simply decided that helping was the right thing to do, even after learning that tomorrow might take her farther away than either of them had imagined. The desert remained quiet throughout the night, but inside the damaged vessel time seemed to move faster with every passing minute. Soft white diagnostic lights illuminated the open propulsion chamber while the salvaged ceramic ring rested at the center of Lucas's workbench beside precision tools borrowed from two completely different civilizations. Alara adjusted the final energy calibration with measured concentration, watching delicate streams of blue light travel through the newly assembled stabilizer. The readings fluctuated once, then slowly settled into perfect alignment. She stared at the display in silence. Against every engineering standard she had ever trusted, the hybrid design was functioning. Not flawlessly, not beautifully, but reliably. Lucas leaned against the edge of the maintenance platform and looked at the glowing assembly with quiet satisfaction. Looks like it finally decided to cooperate. Alara slowly shook her head. No, it adapted. She paused before continuing. There is an important difference. Lucas smiled. Machines are not so different from people. She almost challenged the statement before realizing she no longer possessed enough certainty to dismiss it. The repaired stabilizer slid smoothly back into its housing. One by one, the dormant systems surrounding the engine compartment awakened. Soft vibrations traveled through the silver hull, while faint golden lines appeared beneath the surface, like rivers of light returning after a long winter. Air circulation resumed. Navigation arrays responded. Internal gravity stabilized. Even the dormant ship intelligence quietly came back online as restored power flowed through the core systems. The ship was alive again. Alara looked around the restored chamber with an emotion she could not immediately identify. Relief existed, certainly, but it was accompanied by something unexpectedly heavier. Departure no longer felt like victory. It felt like an approaching farewell. A gentle chime echoed through the cockpit. The long-range search vessel had entered the outer edge of Earth's orbital boundary. Estimated arrival now measured less than 6 hours. Lucas quietly closed his toolbox and began placing each wrench, screwdriver, and measuring instrument back into its familiar compartment. He worked with the same calm care he had shown from the beginning, never asking whether she intended to leave, never asking whether they would meet again. Finally, Alara broke the silence. There is something I have not told you. Lucas looked up. I figured there probably was. She stepped toward the panoramic canopy where countless stars stretched across the night sky. I am not merely an exploration engineer. I serve as chief systems architect for the Concordium Royal Expeditionary Fleet. Every first contact report, submitted under my authority, influences how emerging civilizations are classified. Lucas remained still, meaning her voice grew softer than he had ever heard before. Meaning my observations determine whether worlds are recommended for scientific partnership, protected isolation, or strategic containment until they reach acceptable technological maturity. The words settled heavily between them. Lucas slowly understood what she was saying. This mission had never been important only to one damaged spacecraft. Somewhere beyond the stars, an entire civilization trusted her judgment about Earth. Before either of them spoke again, another signal interrupted the silence. A secure transmission materialized above the navigation console. The image of a senior Concordium fleet commander appeared in pale blue light. His expression remained composed, but his voice carried unmistakable authority. Chief Systems Architect Vale, your vessel has reported unauthorized contact with an undeveloped civilization. Prepare a full justification upon arrival. Alara answered without hesitation. Understood. The commander studied her for a brief moment before speaking again. Be advised. Any recommendation that contradicts established Concordium First Contact Protocol will require review before the High Council. Should your judgment be found compromised by personal involvement, your commission, rank, and authority may be permanently revoked. The transmission ended as quietly as it had appeared. Silence returned to the ship. Lucas had not understood every detail, but he understood enough. That sounds expensive, he said with a faint smile that could not quite hide his concern. Alara looked at the stars beyond the canopy, then back at the mechanics standing beside the workbench where two civilizations had unknowingly solved the same impossible problem together. It may cost everything I have built. Lucas answered with the same quiet certainty that had guided every decision since they met. Then only say what you honestly believe. She searched his face for several long seconds. There was no fear, no expectation, no attempt to influence her decision. Only trust. At that moment, Alara realized the greatest lesson she had learned on Earth was not how humans repaired machines. It was how effortlessly they remained faithful to their principles, even when those principles carried a price. For the first time since accepting her commission, She knew exactly what she would write in her report, even if it became the final report she ever submitted as Chief Systems Architect of the Concordium Royal Expeditionary Fleet. The first rays of sunrise spread across the Nevada desert, just as the restored Starship lifted a few inches above the sand, its silent engines creating gentle ripples that danced across the ground without raising a single grain of dust. Golden light reflected from the polished hull, while distant mountains glowed beneath the awakening sky. Lucas Bennett stood beside his old pickup truck with both hands resting comfortably in his jacket pockets, watching the impossible machine prepare to leave the only way he knew how, quietly. Alara Vale completed the final system verification, then looked one last time at the repaired gravimetric stabilizer resting deep within the engine core. The ceramic alloy recovered from an ordinary human salvage yard had become part of one of the most advanced spacecraft ever built. Every successful diagnostic reminded her of the same uncomfortable truth. The repair should never have worked. Yet it had succeeded because one human engineer refused to believe impossible, and because another engineer finally learned that perfection was not the only path to excellence. A soft harmonic signal echoed through the cockpit. The Concordium recovery vessel had entered low orbit and established a secure communications channel. A luminous holographic figure appeared before Alara. The senior fleet commander spoke with calm authority. Chief Systems Architect Vale, report mission status. Alara stood perfectly still. Exploration vessel repaired. Mission complete. Any significant findings regarding the native civilization? Her eyes drifted toward Lucas, who remained outside exactly where he had been from the beginning, making no attempt to approach, interfere, or listen. He simply waited, respecting a conversation that did not belong to him. She remembered the unopened bottle of water resting on a desert rock. She remembered the old notebook filled with hand-drawn sketches. She remembered the roadside diner, the friendly wave from a stranger, the forgotten ceramic ring rescued from a pile of discarded machines, and the mechanic who had never once asked what reward awaited him. Finally, she answered, yes. Significant findings. The commander waited. Earth possesses moderate industrial capability and limited interstellar potential at present. There was a brief pause. Recommendation? Alara slowly inhaled. Immediate partnership. Silence filled the bridge. The commander studied her without speaking. Your recommendation directly contradicts established Concordium First Contact Protocol, he finally said. Explain your assessment. Alara did not hesitate. Our previous models evaluated technological advancement as the primary indicator of long-term civilization value. Those models are incomplete. Humans innovate under limitation. They preserve what others discard. They cooperate without obligation. They assist strangers before understanding the cost. Their greatest resource is not their technology. It is their character. Another long silence followed. One final question, the commander said quietly. Were our original conclusions about humanity incorrect? Alara looked through the canopy toward Lucas, standing alone beside his weathered pickup truck. He had no idea an entire civilization was waiting for her answer. A gentle smile appeared on her face. Yes, she replied. We believed humans repaired machines. I was wrong. They repair the people who build them. The commander lowered his head almost imperceptibly before speaking again. Your report will be transmitted to the High Council exactly as written. You understand the consequences if they reject your recommendation. I do, Alara answered calmly. The commander inclined his head once. Emergency first contact recommendations were among the few matters the High Council could review immediately through the Concordium Quantum Relay Network. Every council member had already witnessed the transmission as it unfolded. Several long seconds passed. Then every display aboard the ship illuminated at once. A new transmission appeared across the navigation console. High Council decision received. The commander read the message in silence before looking back at Alara. The Council has accepted your recommendation unanimously. He paused, as though appreciating the weight of the moment himself. Earth is hereby designated a protected world and recognized as a future ally of the Concordium. Minutes later, dozens of distant lights shimmered high above the morning sky before gradually changing formation. Instead of descending in military precision, the unseen fleet pivoted together, broadcasting a diplomatic beacon toward Earth before disappearing into the darkness beyond the atmosphere. No weapons appeared. No warnings were issued. Only a promise that humanity would never face the stars alone. As the larger vessel departed, Alara walked down the lowered boarding ramp and stopped in front of Lucas. She held out the weathered notebook he had forgotten beside the engine compartment. I believe this belongs to you. Lucas accepted it with a quiet smile. Looks like you fixed your ship after all. She gently shook her head. No, we fixed it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alara stepped back onto the ramp as the silver vessel rose silently into the brilliant blue sky. Lucas watched until it became nothing more than a bright star disappearing into daylight. Thousands of light years away, inside the grand hall of the Concordium, a new illustration was placed beside the rewritten First Contact protocols. It did not show powerful warships, advanced technology, or glorious victories. It showed an old red toolbox resting beside a damaged alien starship in the middle of a quiet desert, reminding every future explorer that the measure of a civilization was never the machines it built, but the kindness it freely offered to a stranger.